Jonathan Schick back with you with Shtisel Man, and we are opening season 2 finally, right? After we finished season 1, congratulations. And we're on season 2 if you're following along episode by episode. Here we are. And season 2 has a lot of wonderful storylines and promise to it, and it ends up being an amazing season as well. A maturing season in a number of ways than over season 1. But season 2's episode 1's introduces some storylines that I would ask, and maybe you've asked yourself, is this really something that can actually happen? Let's take 3 quick things. One is Chanina and Ruchami, and one is the naming of the baby Zelig, and one is the introduction of Shulam's brother, Nuchem, and his type of attitude. Okay. The bottom line with these 3 situations is that these are all exceptions. They can happen, and they do happen, but they're all exceptions. So now I'm not trying to be apologetic and say, well, the Hasidic world has no problems. But I am trying to say that these 3 examples are all just dancing on the edge of what would actually go on. Let's take one at a time. First of all, Ruchami prepares into this study hall and sees a boy studying alone, a teenager studying alone, and seems to be someone who's extremely pious and extremely dealing with perhaps guilt and dealing with other types of painful feelings, very religious, but also very anxious, if you will. A lot more to say on that. We'll do that later on in this season. But would this happen, that a 16-year-old boy would just be sort of left alone in a study hall in the middle of Jerusalem? Unlikely. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. More likely it would be a 25-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 32-year-old who's already on his own. But a teenager? No. Those boys would generally, the rabbis in the various yeshivas or communities would be able to understand that, work with this student and be able to guide him appropriately, but not to leave him sort of, leave him by himself consistently in a study hall by himself. That is an unlikely scenario. It's a good storyline, and it's true that the Chanina character does develop and evolve in what I would say more accurate or perhaps more likely scenario ways. But again, this is a very strong exception to what would really happen. Secondly, Zelig, the naming of the baby, paying $50,000 to name a baby after a departed husband is also extremely unlikely, and it is something I have never heard of in all my years, and I have connections, and I'm involved in the yeshiva and the Hasidic communities, and have been all my life, and never have I heard such a story like this. Now, there's nothing wrong with the storyline. It's cute. It's got a lot of drama to it, but would it actually happen? What more likely would happen if someone died without a child named after him? In those cases, there might be a situation where one would have nephews or nieces that would name after that uncle or aunt. If the person is literally without any cousins or relatives and is literally by himself, then they may actually do something more like pay a yeshiva to say Kaddish, the prayer that is elevating the souls of the departed. They may pay people to say the Kaddish for them, not $50,000, but a sum, and that would give support to the soul of the departed. But I've never heard of a situation of giving that type of money, naming the baby. Although, could it happen? Yes, it could. Did it ever happen? It's possible. And I'm not saying I'm aware of all cases, but it's also an exception. It's an unlikely scenario. And finally, Nuchem comes back from Belgium. Would you have in the Hasidic world someone who would be so sort of vulgar, and as the Yiddish word would be grubba. Grubba would mean like a vulgar, like a little bit of his hands are dirty type of thing. We see very clearly that Nuchem is that type of character, a very slippery type of guy. Would a guy like this show up in the Hasidic or Yeshivish world? Yes. The answer is yes. Of course, in any world, there's going to be people who are more on the edge, are more edgy and whatnot. As far as Nuchem's personality combined with, his sayings about the damned Zionists and wicked Zionists, I don't see that as being that likely, okay? You might have a guy, and you will have plenty of guys who are, quote, grubba, okay? Because that you have temptation lurks with everyone, no matter what sect or involvement you are. But to have a guy with those type of, quote, character traits in the Hasidic world also worrying about those wicked Zionists, okay, this is a minor point, but again, this is not like a common saying that you hear in the Hasidic world. You may hear them in the Neturei Karta, which are the real extreme anti-Zionist Hasidic camps. But while the classic Hasidic communities won't necessarily be pro-Zionist, or they won't be, but for them to utter these type of curses, if you will, in a derogatory manner, these are also quite exceptions to the rule. So as far as fact or fiction, there's, not to mention, the grandmother going ahead and sleeping with someone not her husband due to her loss of memory. That's probably the most likely thing that can happen in this particular episode. I'm being a little facetious, but the bottom line is that season 2 opens up with some sort of more fanciful type of storylines to reel us in, and they're cute, and as they develop, you'll see that they end up being a little bit more colorful and more, I think, realistic as it goes on. But they're good story points. And fact or fiction, the answer is fact, but unlikely. We'll see you next time with more Shtisel Man. Love your comments, and don't forget to subscribe. And all the best. See you for season 2, episode 2 coming up next.